Good evening, Mr. Thomas. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Suki, are you there? I don't know if you have audio from you. Good evening, everyone. We'll begin
Can
shortly.
everybody hear me?
I can hear you now, Suki. How are you?
Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yes.
Fantastic, Mia. Thank you. Okay, we'll just wait a couple more minutes, see if Nicola comes in, and then we'll get started. Where is it?
Director Superiors Cornerback. 300 percent.
Okay, I think we're gonna get started because we've got a lot to get through, and I can't promise we'll be out of here by 8:30, but hopefully by 9. And I'll save the most exciting parts for the end, so hopefully that will be an incentive to stay. I'm going to waive the reading of the rules of order since we're a pretty small group here. And I just want to introduce the committee members who are here. There's myself, Vanessa Raptopoulos, who's a CB9 board member on the Economic Development Committee, and Regina Clark, who is a resident committee member. Regina, are you a resident member or a full board member?
A resident committee member.
Gotcha. Okay. And right. And so we also have Nicola Cox, who hopefully will be with us soon. So I think we'll get started. So this is about City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, which is a series of 19 zoning text amendments to apply citywide that have been released by the Department of City Planning. They held two public information sessions, one in July, one in September. I think that many of you may have seen it, but I'm going to go through all of the proposals anyway, and then we'll discuss each one and see if we can come up with some preliminary recommendations and or questions. So we won't have a great deal of time to discuss each proposal, so please keep your comments short and sweet. And with that, I will get started. So I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me for a minute. Okay. So, sorry, is that visible to everybody?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm not going to go through every single proposal just in the interests of time and because some of them clearly are not intended to apply to our district. They apply to like Midtown or Manhattan. So the first proposal I want to talk about is Proposal 2, which is asking to remove the distinctions between our C1 and our C2 districts. Okay. So actually, my apologies. I was going to start with a discussion of the districts themselves. So I had sent out to the committee members a description of the various zoning districts and their purposes that came from the zoning code. And so I wanted to ask if anybody had any thoughts about that. If they've, because this is something that goes back to 1961. So is this something that people still feel makes sense? The distinctions between these different categories, the C1 through the C8, and what their purpose are? Do people have questions about what they think it means? Just raise your hand if you wanna speak. Regina?
I'm trying to figure out, you said there was an email sent with details?
Yeah, actually, my apologies. It probably didn't get to you, because I'd sent
Problem.
it out last week. But I'll just really go through it very briefly. The districts that are the commercial zones, the commercial overlays, which are essentially allowing retail uses and other types of uses on ground floors in our district. The districts that are mapped are C1, C2 on the main commercial corridors, and C8 is mapped on Empire Boulevard. And there's a tiny amount of C4 that's mapped in the northeast corner of the district. So I'm just going to very quickly read the descriptions that I sent out of C1. C1 is essentially a local retail services district. And there's a very specific description of it, and it includes some terms that maybe require some interpretation. It's, for convenient local shopping. Somebody's described it to me before as the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And it's intended to provide it. They're supposed to be relatively, quote, relatively unobjectionable to nearby residences, and to provide for continuous retail frontage. So those are two terms that you see throughout the zoning and are probably worth discussing. Does anybody want to say what they think that means to them? Zhang?
Yes, good evening. Is not really what it means to me. I do have a question about the C1, C2. May I ask it now or no?
Yeah, I mean, is it a kind of a general question about like the
Yeah,
general of the
it's not
district? Yeah,
complicated. No,
yeah.
the question I'm because I'm trying to understand is that C1 versus C2. Now, are all the boxes listed in C2 the only boxes that can be listed in C2? For example, what about nightclub? I don't see it in C2, but can C2 have it? So is the C2 list just a generalized idea, or is that like black and
Yeah,
white?
so that's why I backtracked a little bit and wanted to start with the general descriptions of the districts. I'm Yeah, so to go back to C1 and C2, C1 is a local retail service district. C2 is a local retail service district. The difference I would say is that C1 is more considered like dry, it's more retail and less services. What you see with C2 is it's a lot of like contractor services and some auto services and things like that that are not included in C1. But otherwise, the C2 is a retail district that has all kinds of small stores, like groceries, restaurants, dry cleaners, all the things that you see on your local retail corridors. Does that
Okay,
answer
so
your question?
so just to be clear, what's listed in C2 doesn't encompass all the things that can be listed in C2. This is just like a
Well,
generalized example.
yeah, so what's in city planning's presentation is not encompassing at all, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. What is and isn't actually there. They're kind of giving a few specific examples, but generally speaking, C1 and C2 are all kinds of like small retail stores. And then C2, in addition, allows certain types of service establishments that are like contractor establishments or auto service that are not allowed in C1. as a general matter. So, like as a general matter, like I said, that the main difference is C2 is a local service district, and it doesn't talk about this issue of continuous retail frontage. It's still supposed to be like not objectionable influences, whatever that means, but the continuous retail frontage part is not in there. So does anyone like have want to talk about what they think that means or what the purpose is of the difference? Anybody have any thoughts about that? And then, just to give you an idea of the differences, C8 is a service district. It allows like somewhat more industrial uses, small manufacturing, but and it specifically says this is a district where we expect to see more noise and a significant amount of trucking activity, and therefore it's not compatible with residential housing or retail. So, that's why we don't see housing on Empire Boulevard. And the C4 district is considered to be like major shopping centers, like larger retail stores, like department stores type of thing. Does anybody else have comments? Andrew?
Hi. Yes. I wanted to say two things. First, I don't know if I'm not a community board member, so I don't know if this is a fully open meeting, but hi, I'm Andrew. I live in the district. I'm an architect. I would say that Empire does have non-conforming residential within its C8 boundary, especially between Bedford and Washington Aves. And then I would also say that maybe this is a good time to introduce the concept of a use group, because different use groups like nightclubs are not permitted within C1 or C2 districts for the zoning resolution.
Or C8, really.
Yeah, but we shouldn't conflate the idea of zoning C versus use group number.
Yeah. So yeah, Andrew is correct. There's also sometimes you see things that don't seem to fit in. That I know there's an apartment building there. And that's known as a non-conforming use. That was probably there from the 1920s or 1930s before the zoning resolution came about and restricted these uses. And so they're allowed to stay even once the zoning law changes. Was there anything else you want to say, Andrew? No? Okay. Okay. So my thinking about the continuous retail frontage issue, and I would love to hear comments from small business people or anyone else in the community, is that it's a kind of like walkable retail, right? You want people to be able to walk up and down in a nice and shop without being run over by cars, without running into like loading and unloading on the sidewalk. Like it's like a nice shopping experience, basically. What do you guys think about that? I saw a hand. Zhang?
Yes, my opinion is that this is just all too vague. Because I understand that what you said about the shopping experience, yes, but by not giving us defined terms of what is permitted, what's not permitted, it just makes everything opaque, because I know that there are individuals who could use this towards their advantage. Make me think shopping area, but sneak in homeless shelter. So I think it's very dangerous to sit down and give us certain things to okay without having clear black and white terms of what is okay and what is not okay.
No, I understand what you're saying. And so the reason I'm kind of starting at the top and working down is yes, because once we start looking at the individual categories, you will see the sort of what the rhyme and reason is mostly, like I think some of it is a little bit outdated, some of it probably needs some updates, but there's kind of like a rhyme and reason behind it, I think. So like like for example, like to me, continuous retail frontage means I don't want to see like, a lot of establishments that aren't open to the public, like wholesalers or a lot of loading docks or huge curb cuts, things like that, right? Because that makes it hard for me to like walk down the street and window shop. Like, I like to window shop, but I don't know if anybody else is the same. Regina?
Okay, so speaking to the C1 and C2, I just had to peruse over to the website nyc.gov/site planning, etc. So as described for at least commercial overlay from their description, it's mapped within residential districts to serve local retail needs. So like you said earlier, so grocery store, dry cleaner, restaurants, for example. Definitely doesn't get specific. The concern, I don't have a problem with, it makes life easier. A lot of us who don't have cars, the simple things that are needed that makes, communities comfortable. I guess the concern, I know I might be moving ahead, is that shift to the C4, 5, 6 sort of, yeah, I guess, well, I'll leave that to later. Because I definitely don't want to detour your this meeting, but C1, C2, it sounds like basic needs of business or neighborhoods where you don't have to commute forever. Once upon a time, you did have to go all the way to Manhattan to do stuff. Granted, there were a few things in Brooklyn, so there are some conveniences that does make your living experience better.
Vanessa?
Yeah, a few things. I think that on this list, they make it look nice by putting mini golf and movie theaters because everybody likes those. But the bike rental and repair, I think that involves the lithium batteries. And like, do we want to approve a bunch of residential buildings to have a fire hazard on the first floor? Like, I'm pretty sure that there have been lots of fires that have happened in the city because of those bike batteries. So are we talking about the bike batteries with the bike rental and repair? That's a little bit of a gray area for me.
Yeah, that definitely speaks to the objectionable influences or relatively unobjectionable, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, like, yeah, movie theaters and mini golf, these are things that would spur economic development. People want those things, I would think. And there are a lot of people who do drive scooters, so I understand the need for a bike rental and repair, but what's the deal with the batteries when they come?
Yeah. Andrew?
Hi, not to sound again like a broken record, but I would highly recommend delving into the use groups because they explicitly list by kind of use, the more specific, not opaque stuff, what is allowed in C1 versus C2. I also bring this up, and you start with use group like 5, which is hotels. Use group 6 is retail, which is allowed in C1, C2. Use group 7 starts to differentiate. Home maintenance repair services like plumbing shops are only allowed in C2, but not in C1. This is like, if you just go to NYC planning use group list, it'll come up. The reason I think that this is a valuable level of granularity for us is because DCP, when they were reviewing, said explicitly, like, hey, we got a lot of referrals of the positive and referrals of the negative from community boards, but we didn't see a lot of conditional yes, or we would have liked to see this specific change. And I feel like that level of gray area is something that's really valuable to provide.
Right. So we'll definitely talk about the specific, use groups. But maybe this is a good time to stop and ask where these districts are actually, now that we have a sense of what they are, where are these districts mapped in our community? What do we have? So I am going to screen share. Okay. So I'm just gonna put in something that is close to me. Vanessa, what's the address of your store? Let's throw that in there and start with.
617 Flatbush.
Okay. 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 So I'm just going to highlight all of the C1s.
Suki, we still see the presentation.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to go to okay. So where do we have C1 in our district? Okay, so you can see we have it on Flatbush Avenue in Prospect Lefferts Gardens. We have a little bit on the north half of Rogers Avenue. Bedford Avenue does not have a commercial overlay, and this will be important to remember later. We have a little bit on Washington Avenue. We have a little bit on Nostrand Avenue in Crown Heights. And we have a little bit up here in Crown Heights. There's this is probably like Brooklyn or Kingston, I think maybe. Yeah, so we've got some in the eastern half of the district. I think it's east of New York. Yeah, it's Kingston, Troy. We've got some C1s. We've got some C1s. I think this might be Utica. Schenectady, Utica. It's sprinkled throughout the district. The part that I'm most familiar with is here and here on Flatbush Avenue. Those of you who are in Crown Heights, you probably know this area here and here, and these areas here. We also have C2 mapped, which you'll remember is the local service district. It's a little bit more permissive than C1. It allows things that are a little bit more like auto service oriented and a little bit more contractor and repair services. So that's a lot of this is mapped on Nostrand Avenue and some on Rogers Avenue. There's kind of some towards the eastern end of the district. There's like some little bits of it up here. There's a little bit at the north end of Flatbush Avenue. Okay, and then we have our C8 districts. These are the more industrial districts that allow much larger established service establishments and retail establishments. And it's here, tiny bit here, up in Crown Heights. On Utica, we've got some. We've got a little bit up here on, no, that's Atlantic Avenue, that's Sport 8. So we don't really have that much C8. And we have a tiny amount of M1 manufacturing on the southern border, on Clarkson and Winthrop, close to the hospitals. It's adjacent to the SUNY downstate in Kings County. And manufacturing M1 districts, as it says, are designated for areas with light industry. And then we have this tiny amount of C43 up here on Utica Avenue. And so these are supposed to serve a wider area. It's major and secondary shopping centers. And so they allow for larger stores, you know, department stores and so on. Okay. And, you know, in showing where the different districts are mapped and talking about what they allow and don't allow, you know, keep in mind that these were probably mapped in the 1960s, and you might think, well, gee, that doesn't fit what's there today. So then there's two thoughts that you should have, which is, should we change the zoning district to a district that matches it better? Or should we just change the definitions of all the districts at all? So like what city planning is doing now is just overall changing the definitions of all of the districts. But, you know, we as a local community board can also look at whether it makes sense to change some of the zoning categories that we feel no longer match what's there. So does anybody like have any comments about the zoning districts? Like, does anything stand out to you that you feel is like weird about the zoning of the commercial districts where you live? Any hands? Vanessa?
I mean, it's kind of weird that Rogers Avenue is half and half. It seems like it's half C1 and then half C2, right?
Yeah, I had that same thought. And then I remembered some of my older neighbors, like the ones, and the older CV9 members, like the ones who have been around since the 60s. They said that there used to be a lot of contractor establishments, like there was a window glass place, and there was a plumber, and you know, like a plumbing store. And so maybe that's why parts of Rogers Avenue had that local service zone, but we hardly have those anymore. I mean, like my experience with contractors is they don't really have premises. They just come around to you call them and they come to your house, right? Same thing with like, you know, appliance repair. I think the last vestige of the appliance repair was on Fenimore and Rogers several years ago. There was like a washing machine repair place there, and then they closed. And now you just like call the service guy and he comes to your house. So maybe that's like these small contractor places are not something that we, you know, have anymore. I don't know. What do other people think? Okay, I can't see who's raising their hand. Mia, can you call on someone?
Or it's Regina, then Vanessa.
Regina, okay.
I mean, just to comment on Rogers, I know there was a restaurant, a few actually currently, yeah, there's stuff there. So it's not too crazy, but I guess from that timing to be on one side, then, you know, that might refer to what you were speaking to, but Rogers very much does have places that are
Yeah. I
relevant.
feel Rogers is like much more of a normal, you know, it's not really a service district anymore.
Yeah, not that kind of service. I think it was just like restaurants is what I've really seen.
Yeah.
If anything. A few years ago, some closed, but not as much traffic.
And what about Nostrand? What do people think about Nostrand? Does that like meet the definition of a service district? Vanessa, you'd raised your hand.
Well, I was thinking, before, if you were saying that like contractors and plumbers aren't really working out of these storefronts anymore, then what is the need to change the zoning to include businesses that aren't trying to open anyway? Like, I don't know. Seems like a disconnect. But Nostrand seems to be much like Flatbush now, with bakeries and restaurants, lots of restaurants.
Yeah, I agree. Tara?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that up that north of Empire, on both North Strand and Rogers, there's a lot of there's plumbers, there's all kinds of places like that. There's like a t-shirt manufacturer, somebody doing printing, and all these storefronts as you go up from Empire toward Eastern Parkway. There's a lot of sort of industrial uses of those places. Quite a few. You'd be surprised, but I walk up there.
And that's interesting because they actually have C1, not C2, north of Empire. So, you know, maybe these are things that we can tell city planning that, you know, that doesn't really match the way things are. Regina?
I was commenting in regards to Nostrand. Very much something, I mean, and not even just recently. Granted, newer places have opened up, but it's long since been a place of business, particularly for Caribbean folks, for sure. There's places that I've frequented, my parents have frequented before they left, you know, so, you know, very much, but restaurants for sure, the bakeries that have been around, Allen's Bakery, and other things. But for the most part, it's mostly that and a handful of craft like spots and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone want to comment on you know, Utica or Troy or Kingston? We don't want to forget them.
Suki, am I visible to you?
Are you visible to me?
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
I see you.
Apparently we're addressing two tasks at the same time, which might be a little difficult. One is to make suggestions on the definitions of the various zones from C1 on up. And the other is to make suggestions or comments on where those districts, regardless of which one they are located in our district. I don't know, do you want to consider both of those at the same time, or?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so maybe you would like to comment on the C8. What kind of uses do we see there now?
Well, I don't have the district definitions.
That's Empire Boulevard, basically, between Flatbush and Rogers.
Is
So
that particular zone that that's caused a lot of heat?
Yeah, the C8 basically permits some like custom manufacturing, some light manufacturing, auto service, auto repair, larger types of retail stores, you know, kind of like, yeah, large format stores, auto businesses, that's what it permits. What do you think that, how does it, what's there now? What do you think about what's there now?
Well, the difficulty in the past that for years, as I recall, is not so much what's in the Empire corridor, but the people on either side of it who are suffering what they see as impacts on their low R category properties. The buildings on Empire now are quite large, and they're causing
Right.
these people
So
see as
yeah,
negative
so
impacts.
the other thing that's allowed on a C8 district is like storage and wholesale,
Correct.
large wholesale and large storage establishments. That's not allowed in a C1 or C2.
And I don't know what the height is. I'm guessing 60 to 80 feet. So
Yeah, I don't think it's restricted. But
On Empire, it's restricted, the height. They can only go up as
It is
high.
an FAR of 2.
Yeah, Empire's definitely restricted the height for sure.
so the density is very much restricted. The density is low. We kind of went over this in our last ULERT presentation. So that in and of itself tends to restrict the height. But I don't believe that it's sky exposure plane. It doesn't have an explicit height limit.
It does.
Someone, Andrew, our architect, you want to comment?
I think it's an FAR of 2, but there may be floor-to-floor height limits so that people don't take advantage of extremely tall ceilings.
Right. So the reason you don't see extremely tall buildings is because, you know, like it's just like commercial buildings tend to want to use a very large floor plate. So they want to use a lot of the lot and spread out the building, as opposed to using a tiny amount of the lot and making a tower, you know, like what you see at 626 Flatbush. They're really only using like a quarter of the lot. But on commercial buildings, they, you know, it makes sense for them to use the whole lot. They want a large floor plate, which again is kind of one of the points of the C8 district, is that it permits these very large established, you know, it's designed for larger stores. Regina, do you want to comment? Regina?
I thought I hit the button.
Oh, okay.
I was
Okay.
slacking. So speaking of the C8 on Utica Avenue, there's
Okay.
definitely things that are active, such as automotive shops. Now there are some, I don't know how we would describe a closed down Duane Reade or Walgreens or whatever they call themselves. There's actually 2. And some things are closing, like there's a storage facility that was there. I think it might have been U-Haul. No, that just opened actually, JK. There's a lot of changes, but there definitely are in that region, a lot of like auto, those types of buildings, even other things that exist. And it sounds like it should probably stay the same if we're going by that definition of what exists and currently still lives on.
Yeah, and one thing that's important to keep in mind with the C8 is that under the current definitions, and I think under the new ones as well, it's considered incompatible with residential and retail because of noise and trucking and traffic and things like that. I mean,
and to add to that, I guess it's like that Utica, there's the buses that go through there constantly. Obviously the train gets off there. I mean, it's a well-known noisier block, even being a block away. So on Schenectady, kind of a block away, there's little numbers. It's still very quiet. I don't hear like Utica noise or anything like that for me personally. But it's just known there's more traffic there. So
Nicola?
Hi, good evening. I'm just trying to understand, are we going to be looking at the actual text amendments that are being proposed?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Because I think some of these categories are collapsing, aren't they?
Well, that's exactly the point. I want people to, I want to discuss whether, these categories still make sense to us, if we think there's still a need for them. And, then we can talk about the proposals if they make sense to us, if they work for us, right?
Okay.
So Tara. And then Zhang.
Oh, I'm just happy with Empire the way that it is, because I feel like we need commercial space like that where people can develop businesses and not be too high. So I like Empire at least between Rogers and pretty much Washington Flatbush, the way that it is.
Okay.
Not too high, and it allows for some development of businesses where people can work in the future.
Okay. Andrew?
I am thinking about the way that self-storage is permitted currently. Like the reason it's allowed in C8 groups is because anything is allowed there that's considered an industrial adjacent thing. It's part of use group 16, but it's not explicitly listed. This is again a concern about what counts and what is explicitly allowed or disallowed within the current zoning resolution. It's because they don't call out self-storage, it can only go in C8, whereas it might make more sense to say self-storage as a thing can only be in an M district, or just the fact that it's not listed anywhere gives it carte blanche to try to like weasel its way into use group 16. I think that, and thus in a C8 district. I also think that it's important to point out that there are no current historical or otherwise instances where a self-storage facility, which is, a large multi-story facility that is close to people and usually not too obtrusive, there is no instance in New York City's history where a self-storage facility has been turned down and converted into housing. And I think that that's kind of a failure of policy because it's a large building. It has typically pretty open ground floor, and it's unobjectionable enough to go through zoning. So I'd like to make that point. I know it's a little bit incendiary and a bit off topic, but I hope you take it.
Okay. Who hasn't spoken yet? Zhang, I'm sorry, you were raising your hand and I didn't call on you. Zhang?
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. I had my hand up accidentally.
Oh, okay. And who's next? Regina?
sorry, that was a thumbs up. I
Okay.
like Andrew's point. I
Okay.
think it is important to be mindful of that sort of situation.
Okay, Tara?
I thought I put my hand down, but anyway, I live very close to that area and they're building a hotel there. They're gonna put some, hopefully EV parking in where that, where the grocery store is gonna go in. I really do not think we should make that residential. I don't want that changed. I think many neighbors feel the same way, that live very close to it and are impacted by this development every single moment of the day with the noise and everything we hear. And if it's going to be developed, and I would like it to stay low rise, no more than 6 stories, what's happening there now, like with the hotel and with the potential grocery store. I know I'm not a fan of the storage facilities, but they're better than, we don't need any more residential here. We've got more than anybody.
So you like the hotel or don't like the hotel?
Well, I'd rather it stayed low, like 1-2 stories like it was before. The hotel, they're almost done, they're getting close to being done with it. And I think, you know, hopefully it's gonna really be a hotel, you know, and not, you know, it has to be temporary. The people that are gonna be in that facility, it's supposed to be temporary. The city needs hotel space, right? So it would be good for our neighborhood restaurants and businesses to have a hotel, because that'll bring tourists that will stay there, right? So hopefully that's what it'll be. I would prefer that. I think would be better than
Vanessa?
to be residential, because all the
Sorry.
residents that's coming is shelters.
Where
So
exactly is this hotel?
it's on Empire in the old funeral home between Bedford and Rogers. It's like a 6-story hotel. Like that's the limit of everything they're building
Yeah.
on that stretch.
It's not finished yet. It's still under construction.
Yeah, it's
On the
it's like
north side of
maybe
the street?
quarters done.
Okay. Okay, do we know what kind of hotel this is gonna be?
Supposedly the application was for bougie type hotel, you know, bougie driveway all around.
Yeah,
But
okay.
that's what they applied for. That's what they say it's gonna happen. That's what I hope it is.
So I have a question for you guys. Do you guys think that there's a need still for automotive uses in a neighborhood like in District 9? I know Regina mentioned that there were still a lot of active automotive uses on Utica Avenue, but I actually don't see any more on Empire Boulevard. There's only the BP gas station in that triangle on Lefferts in Washington.
We miss having the Firestone.
Yes, it's like a big problem to find a repair shop now. And there in East Flatbush, there's quite a lot of like repair garage kind of facilities in that area. I noticed when I bike around. But yeah, we don't really have a place to go to get cars fixed anymore.
Regina?
Yeah, I'm just I guess I'll speak for some of my neighbors. So lots of people have cars, not me. It's definitely there's a need for it for sure. Utica, you know, it's a very wide street. I think that it's helpful. Well, not it could be wider, but it's wider than most of our blocks is what I'm getting to. I'm not sure if it has to stay in 8, but I think there's a need for our community to have some sort of access to those sorts of businesses.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, we had a really hard time finding a body shop to fix our car. It's this specialized car that can only go to certain dealers, and we had to go all the way out to Queens. I would have preferred to give the business to someone local, but you know, had to go all the way out to Queens. So, and do you guys think that, you know, there should be separations between these types of more, you know, industrial? Should these be separated from residential? These like repair shops and does that still make sense to everyone?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
What do you mean by separation?
Yes,
To have,
definitely.
I don't think to have a repair shop next door to you. Is that what you mean?
Well, like, does it still make
below you?
sense? Does it make sense to have the, sorry. Does it make sense to have the, you know, the ban on residential in the areas where the light manufacturing and the auto repair are allowed? I'm sorry, I muted you. It was accidental.
Oh.
Nicola, did you want to?
I would say yes. I would say it's in, especially for light manufacturing. I mean, these zones were put there for a reason.
Yeah.
And so I'm concerned about, you know, making, again, these broad sweeping text amendments without truly understanding the impact to the neighborhoods.
Yeah. Rod?
By collapsing these zones.
Yeah. Rod? Did you?
Yeah, you would have to have a definite separation of buffer between the commercial space and, you know, light manufacturing and residential. You know, for instance, body shops use a lot of like air compressors, and you know, when you start up an air compressor, it makes a considerable amount of noise, and that can be very disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah. Vanessa?
Agreed. I think the body shops bring smelly, loud machines, but also the parking around body shops is like everywhere, all over sidewalks, and it would be a nightmare for that to be like anywhere.
Yeah. So I'll just okay, so I think at this point we can jump into discussing the presentation, which I promise you does we are going to talk about this, the specifics of each zoning district. So there, as we discussed before, there are certain things that are allowed in the C2 district that are not allowed in the C1 district. City planning has highlighted a few of them, which, as Vanessa noted, are probably the less objectionable ones, like, the bike rental, mini golf, the movie theaters. But actually, if you go into the zoning code, it's a large number of things. So I looked at the zoning resolution. I'm gonna, do a new share. Okay, so can you guys see that now?
Yes.
So under the zoning resolution, there are several types of things that are allowed in the C1, in the C2, but not in the C1. It's auto-oriented consumer services, for example, motels, although it has to be close to an expressway, drive-in refreshment stands, auto driving schools, automobile rental with space for up to 100 cars, and public parking garages or public parking lots. That's different from the accessory garages that are required when they build new buildings, which are mostly for the residents, but these would be like garages that are open to anyone, but with a limited size. Automobile dealers, so for example, showrooms, glass and mirror shops, like seat covers, EV charging stations, tire sales and services. So these are things that are not like quite body shops. It's not working on the engine or the body, but like ancillary things like the glass and mirror and the tires and stuff like that. And then there's the home contractor and repair services. The electrician, plumber, roofing contractors, but with a size limit. Right, because C2 is not quite like C8. C8 doesn't have these size limits on some of these establishments. Lumber stores up to 5,000 square feet, appliance repair stores of various kinds, wholesale establishments up to 1,500 square feet, moving and storage with storage up to 1,500 square feet. So Andrew, to your question, this is kind of where like, it doesn't specifically mention self-storage, but under these categories, you have categories where they're talking about storage, and there's size limits in the C2 district, but not so much in the C8 district.
So are these both accessory to another commercial use per area of establishment?
Yes. So for wholesale establishments, 1,500.
These are not self-storage.
No, but it kind of speaks to like, what the concern is, that we don't really want a whole lot of storage, because that's not like an active customer facing use, right? Plus it tends to generate a lot of like loading and unloading traffic. That's my theory anyway. So other uses that are banned, and again, this is kind of my theory, that these are uses that are expected to generate more traffic, more noise, maybe use some hazardous chemicals, like taxidermists and bombers, monument sales, printing establishments, public auction rooms, trade schools, medical and dental labs for research and testing, clothing and costume rental, art and dance studios. And, some of these categories we might think like it's not really so objectionable. And then it also allows amusement and gathering places. So pool, pool halls, bowling alleys, theaters. And then like there's some miscellaneous things like pawn shops that are allowed in C2 but not C1. And I couldn't come up with any theory for that other than like it's just kind of objectionable because like especially in the old days, pawn shops were kind of where maybe like undesirable characters would hang out, or there were loan sharks hanging around and things like that. Does anybody have any comments or questions before I move on? Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next thing. So
Sorry,
what
comment. I
Yeah.
think you might not have seen us.
Sorry, my apologies. I have a hard time seeing when I'm screen sharing.
Oh, no, for sure. Just quick comment, because that one line on that first, the page before this about lumber, I wonder what's the differentiation. So lumber, so we have a true value, but that's on East New York or New York Avenue. And then we have a Ace Hardware on base, it's not quite, but it's on Utica. I think that might fall into C8. I actually have to look at it on a map to make sure, but 5,000 square feet. I mean, things such as like conveniences when you have to, a small footprint, if that falls into lumber store, I think it is important to have small footprint things where people can run to, the store to grab things without having to go all the way to a Home Depot or whatever have you. But that's my own.
No, I think the lumber store of 5,000 square feet is like it's like a lumber store. It's not really like, okay, here's some shims, here's, like a couple of 2x4s or something.
Yeah, because Ace, and I think also True Value, both of them have lumber. For sure, Ace has like a lumber section on the outside if you were to park, and they have
How big do you think it is?
I don't know if anyone else from this part of the neighborhood could give that a shout out, but it's
what was the question? I frequent Ace. What was the question? I'm sorry.
about how big is that Ace?
Oh,
The lumber part of it. It's like it's in the parking lot area, right? Like half of the parking lot area.
The lumber is, yeah. It's not horrible the way they have it set up.
No, it's not. It's not. I would say it's about 100 by say 50. 100 by
Okay,
50.
so that is actually just about that 5,000 square foot limit. So that could go in a C2 under the current regulations, but you say that it's actually in a C8.
I have to look exactly because that C8 borders every like on the line, I think. So I might I'll look, but you could keep going. I could circle back.
Okay, and who else raised their hand? I can't quite see. Andrew?
Quickly, dry cleaners, I believe, are allowed in C1 as of right, but are a pretty chemical intensive and noxious occurrence.
Yeah, that's an interesting, that's an interesting kind of carve out, right?
And then I will also ask these dispensary adjacent things that we're seeing, they're locating mostly in C1 and C2, or are they only supposed to be locating in one specific thing?
Dispensary adjacent? What do you mean?
Like the hemp store, like the Delta. Yeah. Like they're not licensed, but they could be.
Oh, the pot store?
Yeah.
There are no zoning restrictions on them. The only thing is that they're not supposed to be within 500 square feet of a school, house of worship, youth center, drug treatment facility. There are no zoning restrictions on them right now. But that's actually an interesting.
We'll get to this later. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, but we should probably get back to it later. I have my own thoughts about that.
Currently, they tend to locate in storefronts.
Yeah, they're really all over. There's no restriction on them. Who else has their hand up?
Just real quick, I believe the verbiage that you used was continuous ease of shopping or something like that.
Continuous retail frontage, yeah.
Yeah, so how will wholesale and there was some other random things that like people aren't allowed into. Crap, now I can't find it on this list. Sale making establishments. I don't know, those don't seem like they're very random, but I don't think that that is like a continuous, like, what if there's like a huge, you know, row of wholesale buildings that are put in, then that's not a continuous shopping experience. Public can't go into those buildings.
No, it's not. You know, and who else? Regina?
Just a quick follow-up. So the Ace is a C8, but the True Value, that's a different hardware store, it falls into a C1 district, but it definitely is much, much smaller.
Okay.
And small storefront. So
Okay. Right, and good to know. Tara? Tara?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment that
Yep.
I agree with it, Andrew, about the dry cleaner. I think to push it further, we should ban basically anything that produces a carcinogen, and that's dry cleaners, the spray paint facilities, stuff like that should be banned, basically,
Yeah,
except in
that's
very, very restrictive districts. If anybody, there's any residential, like there is residential in that area on
Like
Empire, there are apartment buildings.
nail salons?
Yeah, if they don't have some type of a way to
vent.
absorb the toxin. don't you
Okay,
think?
so you guys will see a lot of this come up very shortly. But I think those are really good points. Okay, so what is going to be allowed under the new regulations? So all of the former C2 uses, all the things that we talked about, and in addition, some uses that are currently allowed only in C8 today will be allowed in both C1 and C2 with some restrictions. So automobile dealers will be allowed in C1 and C2, but not repair services. However, light motor vehicle repair and maintenance can be permitted through special permit of the Board of Standards and Appeals. And notwithstanding the above, light motor vehicle repair and maintenance shops that existed prior to adoption shall be considered a conforming use. And thereafter may be continued. Also, automotive service stations, basically gas stations, can be allowed in the C1 and C2 districts and C4 through C7 by special permit. Technical and trade schools shall be permitted in C1 and C2, but limited to establishments that present no danger of fire, explosion, offensive noise, vibration, smoke, et cetera, et cetera. So like, you know, if you're like welding and using highly toxic solvents, that might not be okay. But this is fairly vague language, as Andrew and others have accused, Zhang has accused us, you know, vague language is an issue. Okay, personal laundry and dry cleaning services. Here's Andrew's pet peeve, in C1 and C2 shall be limited in floor area. Vet services shall not be allowed to board overnight. That's actually a new thing, I think. It could be interesting. You know, the last time I took my cat to the vet, she hates going, but I did take her once. I actually took her to a vet in Prospect Heights, which I'm pretty sure is a C1 district. They wanted to keep her overnight after they gave her an enema, just to like keep an eye on her. So I don't know how that would affect what the vets do. Also, you know, where the building contains a resident, access shall be from an entrance serving the residential portion. That's not new. That comes from the old code. So basically, all of these restrictions are going to be allowed if you go to the BSA. And the BSA is a group of 5 people, 5 commissioners, who are basically, I think, chosen by the mayor from different parts of the city. They have to have professional qualifications, architects, engineers, lawyers, and they discuss whether these things are allowed according to certain rules. And they usually have to do with like, won't unduly affect the character of the neighborhood, won't cause undue traffic congestion, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe it's something we should look into much more specifically. I'll open this up for comments, but I just want to say, like, when I look at this, I think not so much that we should allow all of these uses in C1 in addition to C2. I feel like a lot of our C2 districts should really be, rezoned to C1 because they're not C2 districts. They would benefit from continuous retail frontage. I don't want to, go to a cafe and window shop at a boutique and have to walk over, cars and, motorbikes littered on the sidewalk, or like walk past somebody banging away on the tires, in a repair shop. I think, all of those things kind of ruin the shopping experience, but, I'll open it up now. So Tara?
Oh, I'm good. I'll put my hand down. Sorry.
Anybody else? Tom, are you raising your hand?
I am.
Okay.
I find the list of uses that are proposed for being allowed is, I can't imagine where it comes from. Half the list is associated with automobiles. And then there's a little bit on trade schools, dry cleaning, and vets.
So these are the uses that are currently not allowed in C1, but they're
Well-
proposed to be allowed with certain restrictions. But so you're saying you can't imagine where it comes from. What do you mean by that?
I mean, there are thousands of other uses that might be on this list. It'd be interesting to know how this list was constructed. It would seem that half of it is constructed by proponents of automobile establishments. And a vet sneaks in there, and then some dry cleaning.
So I think what you're saying is we're not showing the full list. So maybe to be honest, I just was trying to save space and not copy the entire code into my presentation. But basically all the normal C1 and C2 uses, which is the regular retail stores, like we were discussing, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the restaurants, etc., they're all still allowed. But in addition to that, all of these, which are currently not allowed in C1, will now be allowed.
Got it.
Rod?
First of all, I was just going to echo what Tom said, because I didn't quite understand how, these businesses were, I guess, set up or selected and whatnot. But I guess one of the biggest things I just want to understand. So the community board, we are an advisory panel. Okay?
Yep.
The commission, I forgot the name of it, the BSA, I'm not sure of that acronym. Do they take into consideration the community board's decision when, I guess, making a judgment or ruling on the districts, on the zoning? Do they
They
take? the
do.
community-
We have had BSA hearings. We've had the BSA come to the board in the past, and they have, when they had an application. So yes, they do take our comments, but it's, again, it's advisory. And it's, by the way, it's a different group than the Department of City Planning. So there's two things that you'll see in here, which is the City Planning Commission authorization and the special permit of the Board and Standards of Appeals. And it's two different processes. The Board of Standard and Appeals is generally considered somewhat more rigorous because they need to go through all of these findings. But, city planning could be rigorous if they chose. They don't necessarily have public hearings like the BSA, but Nicola?
Okay, I'm getting a little confused. With the text amendments for City of Yes, this is a city planning process, not BSA, correct?
It is a city planning process, but what city planning often does is they make exceptions to the general rule by saying that you can go and get a BSA permit. So it's kind of a way of, giving people an out, right, from the normal zoning rule.
Right, but for
Whoever that is, can you mute yourself?
Nicola, she's on mute. Nicolas Almogador, you have to mute.
Okay, but for the purpose of the City of Yes process, they are making text amendments to the city planning process.
Yes.
So, I mean, there may be exemptions down the line, but what they're looking to do is make text amendments to the current zoning.
Yes.
Now, do we have a copy? I don't think I've received the source document that you pulled this information from.
Yes, so the draft zoning text is currently on the city planning website. I'll send you guys a link to it. The document's too big to send out by email. It's 664 pages, which is why I did this, because, to try and pull out and summarize some of what's going on. But I'll send out the link and okay, anybody else? Regina?
I mean, I'm concerned as with, I think everyone else brought up great points to your point about, shopping, and then, there's an automotive shop. Like, I live fairly close to some of these, and you have to sometimes walk off of the sidewalk, and like, it's a lot. So I think this loophole, so to speak, it is concerning because, one, like, for example, if you have a car, you could drive a little bit further, a little, it doesn't need to be necessarily smack dab in the middle of a residential, area. The concerns about the dry cleaning, I'm there as well. I think there's enough spots that new businesses or whatnot could potentially go up there without potentially harming residents, but definitely the automotive and some of these other things. It's just, how would you want to walk down your street and shop the actual local, needed business? Like, we go back to the butcher, the baker, the candle shop maker, the common things you may want to pick up versus some of the extra nuances they're trying to squeeze in. Definitely concerning.
Andrew?
I totally agree about like the walkability portion. I mean, there's I think a pair of auto body shops that are located south of Church that I walk past them fairly frequently, and you have to like step out onto the street, onto puddles. It's into traffic. It's not good. I also don't think that this is hypothetical. I want to call people's attention to the fact that like we have a C8 district, which is sort of a rare thing in central Brooklyn, and that the nearest one to us, Atlantic Avenue, will be rezoned, potentially in the coming year. So that means that there's going to be some immense pressure from people that are in that part of central Brooklyn to move towards Empire Boulevard and try to displace some of the things that maybe are not serving their highest and best use. For example, all those drive-through fast food chains that are on Empire. I think that those are probably going to turn into auto body establishments if we don't do something about it because of the change in Atlantic Avenue's mixed use plan. Is that fair to say, Suki?
That's definitely an interesting point. I hadn't actually thought about that there aren't a lot of C8 districts left in the city, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that. This is Tara. And I know we had numerous auto body shops on Sullivan Place, right up the block from me. There was several places where they were painting cars right across from Ebbets Field, where how many thousand people live? Those are all gone now, which is a relief. All that's going to be changed, and I have no concern that they're going to become auto places. I mean, I guess they could, but I don't think that's going to happen there. I think there'll be other uses, and I'd rather it not be residential. I think we need to focus on places that would create jobs for people. That's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, that's a good point.
Right. I think Empire, given the fact the C8 district is right in front of the park. I don't know if they would really use that for automotive at this point. Know how much of that real estate costs right now, but I could definitely see some areas within our district getting tapped, especially if the commercial overlays are now considered commercial districts. And I'm still trying to understand that that you could have.
It's that's not changing. The way that works isn't changing. They're commercial overlays. It's just that Empire Boulevard is a solely commercial district.
Right, but I thought in somewhere in the text amendments that they're now considering, that's why we ended up with a 5G tower on Montgomery, which is a commercial overlay, but they're now considering that a commercial district. And so since the 5G towers could be placed in commercial districts, they put one there in front of an apartment building.
Yeah, so there was some language, there is some language in the new text that to make it clear that in C1 and C2 commercial districts, they're governed by the commercial regulations. And then there's other things in there specifically about communications infrastructure, which we discussed somewhat when we were talking about zoning for zero carbon, but I don't have time to get into it now, that are specific to that and the rules around whether they can be in residential or mixed use and things like that. But here I just want to very quickly show you, here's an example of the BSA special permit and the conditions. So this is proposal 17 in the proposal to, and they call it like, making auto service stations not conflict with pedestrians, but actually what it is permitting more auto service. According to these conditions, the use will not impair the character or the future use of development of the surrounding area and will cause minimal interruption to the continuity of surrounding retail frontages, will not contribute to serious traffic congestion. It has a maximum area of 15,000 square feet, like washing, car wash is completely located within an enclosed building, designed to provide reservoir spaces, entrances and exits are planned to cause a minimum of obstruction, blah, 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 adequately screened with planting and fences, may prescribe additional conditions and safeguards. So all of these things are good things. They all make sense. you know, but my question here is why does the Board of Standard and Appeals have to hear all of these things if we know that it's going to cause a problem in certain districts? Why, you know, why not just, why force people to go up to the BSA instead of making it clear that it really doesn't work in certain districts? I don't know. Plus, we already have a C8 district, right? Like, what do we need all this for in the C1 and C2? Tom, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, this is extremely permissive. And it takes it out of the zoning field and puts it someplace where we have no influence over it. All of this stuff is couched in terms like not unduly inhibit surface traffic. Well, who's to say whether it's unduly restricting traffic or interfering with pedestrian traffic? This BSA business takes it out of our sphere and puts it in a place that I don't like it.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to move on to, all right, so that was proposal 17, reducing conflicts, but you know, it's actually maybe introducing more conflicts.
We should also give some thought to future use, like what could happen, you know, in these, with these different rezonings, like Bitcoin mining, you know, I've like wondered about that. Could they do that in some of these spaces?
Well, yeah, so one of the uses that is broadly permitted in all commercial districts is going to be like computer, like infrastructure, which could be like data centers. And I don't think we have any data centers in this district, but I know someone who lives next to a Verizon building in Tribeca that's all, you know, data centers, and there's an audible hum that comes from it, even with her windows closed. So, you know, and then Bitcoin mining uses a tremendous amount of energy. That could put stress on the electric grid. So yeah, all of these things are allowed as of right in all commercial districts under the new proposals. Okay, so so another thing which is not really allowed as of right in C1 districts is gyms, health and fitness establishments. That will be allowed in the C1 with performance standards for certain uses, in addition to performance standards for the dry cleaning. So this is where we get a little bit more specific about what these things mean. So for health and fitness establishments, if it's a high intensity use, meaning I think they're like using like gym machines, it has to be in an enclosed building. If there's residential, community facility, or other commercial use as part of the building, before you can even get a certificate of occupancy, you have to have an acoustical engineer verify that's designed according to, you know, the ANSI standards that meet the New York City noise code. So this is, I think, the kind of specificity that we want to see. And, you know, I like the idea that it has to be done before they can even open up, because I think one of the worst things is you have these vague standards for like, you know, like noise and nuisance. And of course, nobody is going to tell the BSA that I'm about to make a nuisance in the neighborhood. And then you don't find out until afterwards. So it's, you know, it's good to have this ahead of time. And so we have these certain, and for dry cleaning, there's standards about solvents, capacity of machines shall not exceed 60 pounds. But the code only has these specific performance standards for these two things, not for any of the other things that potentially a problem. Anybody, any comment?
Yeah, I agree. It's strange.
Yeah, that's-
And there's so many potential just to focus on these two. And I'm really opposed to dry cleaners.
Celia?
Good evening. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions for clarity or something. One of them is, well, one thing that was enlightening so far is something that you said about the vets and stuff and having to go to Park Slope for a vet, which I also have to do, go to Park Slope, or the last vet I had was in Clinton Hill, because there's really not a whole bunch of veterinary clinics anywhere around here. Supposedly there's a new one opening in East Flatbush, but I'm not sure if that has happened as yet. The other thing I was going to ask about was, someone had mentioned the cars in the parking, but I did not necessarily hear a conversation around accessibility. And I think because there are a lot of older people in the East Flatbush neighborhood, as well as even young people, because I have 4 children with disabilities. It's not an accessibility issue for them specifically, but there are other people who have children in East Flatbush that it is an issue for. So
Yeah.
I wanted to know about that, because if an accessoride comes to pick you up and you are someone that either uses the lift for people who need a wheelchair lift, or if you are someone who has some sort of mobility issue where you're using a walker and you still need the lift, it has to be able to get close enough to the sidewalk for the lift to touch the sidewalk, to touch the curb, so to speak.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
that creates a whole heap of issues. And I've been with people who waited for accessoride. I'm not saying accessoride is the greatest thing or on time or anything like that, but it is a necessary thing for a lot of people to be able to get around New York City. So I want to know how, if that can be addressed in this, because we're proposing more things coming into a neighborhood. And no matter where you go, there's going to be certain people with accessibility for various reasons. They could be veterans, they could be people who were born with a disability. It doesn't matter. There's a wide range of that. But my point is anyone addressing accessibility with any of these plans? And the other thing, someone mentioned the smoke shops. There's only about, I think, 23 permits that were given by the state so far for smoke shops. So most of these places are not licensed, they're not regulated, they're all cash, they're cash and carry. So there've been a certain amount of elements that is coming in there to rob, and that's why you find them ended up in the news a lot of the times. But that's not the issue I have. The issue I have is I've been an advocate for education for a long time, in DOE spaces. And one of the byproducts of a lot of these smoke shops recently has been that kids are showing up in the emergency room with overdoses. And I'm not talking about the 18, 19-year-olds. I'm talking about the ones that are in middle school and the ones that are in upper elementary school. Because what happens is the gummies look like gummies that are, fruit gummies or something like that, and it's not. And kids are ended up in the emergency room. So I would like to see what kind of enforcement is going to happen if all these restrictions are, and I have no problem with, having a certain restriction around any chemicals that are to be used that would hurt anyone else. But I think when you say for one business, you have to have it across all of them. Have certain standards for everyone that's going to participate in the neighborhood, as opposed to for just certain types of shops. Because other than that, we have a proliferation. Every block I know practically in East Flatbush has 3 or 4 of those smoke shops on it. At least Utica does.
Yeah,
There's no need for 3 and 4.
We've definitely
There
got
really
them on
isn't.
Flatbush too. Yeah.
So I would like to see if any of this can be addressed in what is being proposed. Like if there is some amendments that can be made so that it's not just the pert ethylene from the dry cleaners that I'm worried about, because some of the dry cleaners have turned around a long time ago because they realized they were losing customers because of the dangerous chemicals. I would like to see enforcement for everybody and not just certain types of things. Like, I didn't know, they had so many restrictions on the vet. That's why I have to go, at least a half an hour away to get a vet. It would be, like I said, it would be nice to see restrictions across the board, everybody sort of like a level playing field, so to speak. But people who definitely, like a lot of these smoke shops, like I said, they don't have a license from anybody. They can close up tomorrow, which I wish they would, but that's not the point. My point is, when it gets to the point where it is endangering someone else or endangering kids or endangering whoever, there should be something said and there should be something done.
So those are all really good points. And maybe we can, as a committee, talk about what recommendations we want to make. And I just want to say, with respect to the accessibility, I have not seen anything in the code that specifically addresses accessibility. But I think, as you point out, the issue is curb space, right? And so I think I would be very concerned about any changes to the code that introduce more traffic and more trucking to areas that are already congested, because as we know, we already have these problems with double parking on our streets, and that means that somebody who needs Access-a-Ride can't get to the curb. And so yeah. So
and with Utica, it's not even double parking, it's triple parking if you're in the area of Church Avenue. It is triple parking all the time.
Yeah, no, those are all really good points. Okay, so so proposal 3, expand opportunities for small scale clean production, subject to environmental standards. They're currently only permitted in less accessible industrial areas. So what does this actually mean? Again, got to go to the code. So the uses that are currently not allowed in C1 and C2, but they are allowed in C5 and C8. And we didn't discuss C5, but for those who got my earlier email, C5 is only in Manhattan. It's like basically in midtown districts, like, the Garment District and places like that actually a long time ago, like 100 years ago, they were manufacturing, they were factories, like in multi-story buildings. They had these factories and lots of workers and everything. And over time, they converted to residential. But, these C5 and C6 districts kind of recognized that they were once manufacturing oriented, and they've allowed them to retain some custom manufacturing. So that's what this allows. It allows custom manufacturing and larger wholesale establishments than what are allowed in C2. So it's, like that you can look at the list, needlework, hand weaving tapestries, bookbinding, custom ceramics, custom clothing, custom hair products, jewelry manufacturing, medical instruments, musical instruments, custom orthopedic appliances, custom printing, watchmaking, and wholesale establishments with accessory storage limited to 2,500 square feet. If you remember, in the C2, it was only up to 1,500 square feet. Okay, so you kind of get the idea of what custom, custom manufacturing. It's not large scale, but it's nevertheless, it's production. It requires equipment. It requires, chemicals sometimes. It's just not on a large scale. Okay, and then, as we saw, larger wholesale establishments are allowed in C5 and C8. So another proposal that we have is to enable wholesale and micro distribution spaces. So what is going to be allowed currently? Well, basically all of these uses that were not previously allowed in C1 and C2, but only in C5 and C8 are now going to be allowed everywhere. And again, there are some performance standards. They're performance standards that are currently in the code for the M1 districts. Let me see if I feel like I lost it. Okay, I might have lost it somewhere. Okay, yeah, I think I lost my slide somewhere. Okay, so there are some performance standards relating to things like air quality and so on, and they are specifically defined. So that's that's a good thing. But I, I'm kind of wondering to myself, like trying to imagine who wants to do like manufacturing in our and it could be everything from you say data centers or footwear manufacturing or machinery manufacturing. Like who does that in a C1 or C2 retail district? And so I don't know if any of you want to speak to that. Like it's like who's asking for this? Regina?
I'm not sure who's asking, but I will say I have concern in terms of if it's small. So look, I have a design degree, apparel design at that. There's a lot you could do in a very small space that will cause absolutely no harm to anyone. So, I'd be concerned with shutting out maybe a small designer or whatever who's altering or whatever. Even there's shops where people sell fabric and they'll design someone something, but a small shop. So I think there is room for establishments like that, but obviously within the reason that aligns with like the C1 needs. Now, obviously larger scale manufacturing and whatever, even small stores where you want to alter garments, right? That's something you could find in a nice boutique. Shortening the hems of a pant or whatever have you. So yeah, I think the larger scale things like what we were talking about earlier about what the garment district used to be, that's very different. But there definitely should be room for your local designers or retail shops to have little things here and there that aren't an impact on.
Okay, so I found my slide. Okay, so the use restriction that is suggested is that the size should not exceed 5,000 square feet. What do you think about that? Does that feel too large, too small, just right? Regina?
I mean, that's pretty large. I wouldn't say too large. Or not, sorry, I wouldn't say too small. I wouldn't say that. Also depends on how many floors. But yeah, 5,000 square feet. I'll mute myself. I think it doesn't alarm me with saying I wouldn't be concerned with going smaller if anyone is more going that way. But let me think about that and what that really looks like.
Andrew?
I was going to say two things. The first is that I think that this is broader than you say it is, and in a good way. Like there's no ceramic studios around here, and that's a fun thing to do. There's a sense that there's a lot of bars and there's work and there's not a lot of other third spaces that are artistic or fun. And these kinds of things, I worked on a project where we were trying to put a ceramic studio on the ground floor and it was impossible. And it could not be done. Regarding the size, I think 5,000 is a bit big, but I would remind people that if this is to be a storefront use, the average lot in our district is a 25 to 30 foot frontage and 100-foot deep lot. So that's 2,000-ish feet for one floor of a storefront space.
Okay, that's good to know. Anyone else? I see more hands raised. I see more hands raised. Who's got their hands raised?
Myself and Cheryl, but Cheryl could go.
Okay.
She hasn't
Cheryl?
spoken.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I wasn't even sure if I could say anything because I thought it was just a meeting that we view. so forgive me if I speak and I'm not a committee member, but
No,
what I,
this is the open.
oh, I never knew. I'm sorry.
I mean, I do
just
mute
watched. Okay.
everyone, you know, in between, so.
Okay, well, what I have to say is, we cannot assume what they're going to put there. I think we have to think, when we're thinking of the future, what could go there. We may not want this, but we say this is okay for that space. We have to keep in mind that when we change it, and once it's zoned, it can't be undone. It'll be harder to undo it. So we can't assume what is definitely going to put there. A lot of people say they plan on putting this, but then next thing you know, they'll change it and put something else, and it will be zoned for that particular thing we may or may not want. So we have to keep in mind of the future plannings, what can be there, what can't be there, what do we want, what do we not want, and will we have a definite say? So I know the community board should, but we also have to watch that if it's zoned for this particular thing and we don't want that particular thing, we may not be able to restrict that particular thing to come that we don't want. I'm just saying, keep in mind the future and what we're doing and what we're agreeing to, because later on in the future, it could come back to bite us.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because what is being permitted is very broad. It covers all kinds of categories. It's food and beverage manufacturing, you know, textile mills, footwear manufacturing, you know, the data centers, machinery manufacturing. It's all kinds of things. You know, there's not that much that you can fit into 5,000 square feet, but you never know. You know, I'm always surprised by how creative people are in Brooklyn and what they manage to do that is the opposite of what you intended. And anybody else?
Myself.
Yeah.
Cheryl, were you finished? Sorry.
Regina?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I'm finished.
Okay. Okay, so going back to what Andrew said about the average square, because I calculated in my mind looking at my house, 2,500 square, like that sounds more reasonable, even with what we have and some stuff going on. To go to 5,000 square feet seems a little bit pushing it. And now I'm thinking about some of the establishments that even currently exist. So it's like, what can come up later? To Cheryl's point, if it is this 5,000 square feet area, particularly being that these are C1 and C2, and just the impact on the future in particular.
Okay.
5,000 feet does seem like a lot, especially in comparison to the average.
Cheryl, did you want to say anything else? Or are you good? So I actually was really curious. I would love to ask Vanessa or one of the other people who owns a small business, like, is it feasible to do like 2,500 or 5,000 square feet of manufacturing in a ground floor retail district? Like, I know it's expensive. That's an issue that has come up for businesses in our district, that retail space is expensive. Do you think anybody would actually like use that space for production as opposed to sales? I mean,
I don't think so, but again, I think that we should just do worst case scenario. And if we think it's a good idea, because if it can happen, it will if the code gets switched. That's just what I think. And if there's something that we don't like about it in the possibility, I mean, yeah, no, who's going to pay $3,500 a month to have a small manufacturing space when you can go to Gowanus and rent a studio, or Greenpoint and rent a studio space where you don't have a storefront and you pay, I don't know what you pay. I would assume like probably around $2,000 for the same amount of space. In other cities in America, a lot of people do that, but that's because the rent is so much lower. And so they'll have a storefront and then a manufacturing space in the front, in the back. I don't know. Seems really expensive, especially with the rents in our neighborhood so high right now. But again, worst case scenario, like whatever we don't want to happen, if we give an inch, I think it will end up being a mistake.
Okay, was there anyone else? I have difficulty seeing who was raising their
Yeah,
hand.
Regina.
My hand went back up.
Okay, Regina.
Yeah, I'm with Vanessa, planning for worst case. So yeah, fun fact, I've been in retail for like 16 years. But the worst case scenario, because any big box or whoever can come in, especially now, one of the trends is smaller footprint stores. So anybody who wants to, especially with larger city planning happening and people seeing like the targets of the Macy's actually found that they smaller footprint stores are really working for them. So you don't know what can actually come, because yes, it might not be a small business or a manufacturing company that comes through, but really thinking forward that they could buy a few buildings and then throw something up, exactly whatever they want. So I think we really have to think about what absolutely makes sense for our neighborhood, and then no to the rest, or it needs to be for other zoning. Like we have great areas for some of these things that exist. It should go there or wherever else in Brooklyn, but not next to someone's apartment or home or whatever. So
yeah. My first thought was, like, just like you were saying, Regina, I've seen stores like a clothing and accessories store where the owner is sitting at the back and it's kind of quiet and she's like stringing beads or sewing or something like that. And that's cool. And it's sort of like, in terms of like rules, like it's like what's the sound of one hand clapping? Like who cares? Who cares if that's a violation or not, right? It's just like one person, doing something that doesn't really require equipment or make noise. That I don't call that production, right? But then again, if you have like, five immigrant women crammed into the basement of your store knitting, your $500 sweaters, it might not be noticed as a zoning violation by the neighbors, but you're sure as heck, probably violating some labor laws or something. And I wouldn't want that for zoning to be okay with that kind of thing. And I just don't see anyone using the ground floor retail space that's very expensive for a mini factory. So I kind of think like there isn't an upside, there isn't a whole lot of upside, but that's just me.
I'd say my only concern is that 5,000 square feet in the C1 and C2. I think that would limit shenanigans. Sure, there could be people knitting, multiple people, but at the same point, to Tara's point earlier, about, we don't want to cut off the feet of small business owners if they do certain special crafts. Those are the things that sell and are special. So, leaving some of those nuance of things that are illegal, like letting that be in its own bucket and then figuring out what enforcement looks like. But I think if the limitations around the square footage is limited, then some of the real manufacturing stuff, there's still enough room to do like what Andrew was talking about, the ceramics. Actually, there's a place on Nordstrom. You still have enough room, but that 5,000 square foot is the thing that really concerns me, that would potentially lead to something else that's bigger.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And there's also performance, speaking of ceramics, they have to have kilns and things like that. There's also performance standards here, regulating humidity, heat, glare, etc. One of my concerns with performance standards is who's going to enforce it, because we have trouble getting people to put out their garbage correctly. And in manufacturing districts, the performance standards say things like you can't have like excessive heat or steam or odors going beyond your lot line. Like how a lot of small stores in the C1 and C2 district, they keep their doors and windows open because they don't have HVAC. And so, like, if this is a common thing that, you know, it's older buildings, they don't have HVAC, they don't have performance doors and windows, like, how do you meet performance standards? And how do you keep things within your lot line? So this is kind of the concern for me, like specifically with our district and specifically with this C1 and C2. Anyone else, Tara?
Yeah, I just believe that there shouldn't be production of carcinogens in any kind of facility. You know, we've like, and there's no enforcement now. Like, even like, say, Burger King produces so much smoke, nobody does anything. You know, you can't. There's on Sterling Street, there's complaints about this garage that has started welding and spray painting, and somebody with baby on that street told me a couple of days ago all the problems they're having and how they're trying to get enforcement. And while there is some enforcement, it just continues. You know, people just continue to violate these rules. So it's better to just not allow them at all, because I don't think there's we can ever really expect enforcement. I think we should just not allow it at all. You know, anything that's going to produce any serious carcinogens for residential spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, I just don't want to go there, you know, with our people's futures and people's futures.
Anybody else? Okay. All right, so now I know it's getting late. So now we get to the exciting stuff that I know everybody wants to talk about. The nightclubs. Okay. So right now, so the proposal is that we would permit dancing in addition to musical entertainment and other forms of entertainment in restaurants and bars. So what is currently allowed? In all C districts, C1 through C8, what is currently allowed is eating or drinking establishments that play music for no cover charge and no specified showtime, with a capacity of less than 200 people. Musical entertainment is allowed, again, as long as it's less than 200 people and there's no cover charge and no specified showtime, so it can't be like a concert venue. However, in C1, C2, C3, C5, and M15B districts, you can only have the entertainment by BSA special permit, and that's the current rule. This may not be like a widely known rule, I think, in our district, you know. Provided that the following findings are made, that the musical entertainment, and it's, by the way, it's musical entertainment, but not dancing. The musical entertainment will not impair the character of the surrounding mixed-use neighborhood, will not cause undue congestion, subject to enclosure provisions. Again, it's that keep your doors and windows closed rule, which a lot of businesses have trouble following. Maybe it's an HVAC thing, maybe, you know, maybe they don't want to, I don't know. The application is made jointly by the owner of the building and the operator of the eating establishment. And they can prescribe additional controls to minimize adverse effect on character, including but not limited to locations of entrances and operable windows, provision of sound lock vestibules, acoustical insulation, amplification of musical instruments, shielding of floodlights, screening, curb cuts, or parking. So, you know, again, all of these things I think definitely make sense. You know, I live in a relatively, you know, close to a C1 avenue, and you know, you can hear it when somebody's having a concert wherever. um, uh, you know, sometimes I don't think we necessarily have a problem with floodlights in this neighborhood, but you know, like parking is an issue in some areas. Like there's something that looks like, I think it's a nightclub, but I'm not sure, on the corner of like Rogers and Tilden or something like that. But there's like double parked cars on the entire block every time I go down there in the evenings. But so how would these rules change? So the proposed rules would allow any kind of entertainment with cover charge or specified show times. So that means it can be, you know, like the rock concert or the, you know, variety acts, can also be dancing. And, you know, what's the special thing about dancing? What does that mean? And I kind of think that it's sort of the only way that we really distinguish between what we all call nightlife or nightclubs and a bar that has music. You know, maybe they have background music, maybe they have live music, but it's an accompaniment to the main thing, which is the, you know, the bar or the restaurant, as opposed to nightlife, where you go there to dance, you know, meet people, do whatever it is that you do. You know, so I think that that's the whole thing about adding dancing. Shall be limited to a capacity of 200 persons or fewer. However, you can apply to the BSA for a special permit for an establishment with more than 200 people. And if you do not have cover charge or specified show times, there is no limit on the number of people that you can have. So it's much, much more permissive. You know, currently, the dancing is only allowed in manufacturing districts. Basically, in no commercial district anywhere in the city can you have a nightclub. You can only have them in manufacturing districts. Is that overly broad? You know, I think that's the conversation that's going on. So I'll leave it at that. And comments? Comments?
Well, say, could somebody open up a nightclub in their home if with a rezoning? Could I say, take part of my house, turn it into a nightclub? Is that
No,
is that going to
not
happen?
unless you have not unless you have a commercial overlay on your house, which
this
some
is only for-
houses do.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's going to result in a lot of noise, right? A lot of noise. I mean, on Empire, there were several music venues with nightclubs, dancing, everything, and that's where that skating rink was. I wish they would have kept the skating rink. That was wonderful, but that disappeared right after I moved here, unfortunately. But it, I don't know. It seemed okay over there. You know, I know people that might be directly behind it might not have loved it, but it didn't. Like, I'm just like very close. It seemed okay in that area to have it, but all those businesses have failed and closed down post-COVID and haven't reopened. You know, they're just sitting empty. So I'm gonna say I'm not a fan, you know, of having it anywhere near, you know, residential districts. It seems like it's a problem for people, you know, people that live in these homes, in these apartment buildings in particular. So that's my opinion.
Anybody else? Nicola, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just think that there's some text amendments that they're starting to make the change under economic opportunity, and then they finish it under the housing changes. Because remember, with housing, they're going to start allowing more commercial and residential.
Oh, they're doing that in economic opportunity. So yeah, I mean, right now, there's also proposals to allow commercial uses on upper floors.
Right.
And in residential, in all residential buildings without a commercial overlay, if you're on a corner. So to Tara's question, yes, if you combine all of the rules, yes, you could open a nightclub in your apartment building or your house, if your house happens to be on the corner.
Any corner could have a.
Yeah.
Who would want this? I'm just curious.
I hand is up, but not for this. I used to live when I was in Hell's Kitchen across the street from a karaoke bar, so there was no dancing. So I think don't need to be footloose about this, about the dancing, because I don't think that's a differentiator. At the end of the day, you get lots of people together drinking late, the hours. It's just like it shouldn't be in a residential area, period. We have to recognize the existing infrastructure. People's homes aren't built for the windows. I mean, I changed a few on mine, but I still hear a few things here and there. So it just shouldn't be in, it shouldn't be near residences at all. And I'm looking at my old hangout spots back in Manhattan, all of that, they're all M1s, and rightfully so. There's a lot going on. It's a known, it's not, CB9 is just not suited to take care of without it being restricted to certain parts of the area. So I think maybe, here's the thing, I guess there's opportunity because there's some things you can and cannot do. I think there should be flexibility for hanging spots, right? To hang, not with excessive music and 200, I do appreciate having certain bars here and there that, definitely not, I'm not going to the one that has all the cars parked everywhere, but modest volume, but a place to hang without having to leave the community. So I do think it's important, but, the late night risk of noise violations and, even SantaCon, like early in the morning, like there's just crazy things that happen. So it is concerning for it to be in this particular area. There's other spots and using other zoning for that, but not in these ones for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nicola? Nicola?
Sorry, I hadn't put my hand down.
Okay. Tara, did you want to speak again?
Oh, no, I'm good. I didn't. I shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I feel like I said this during the public session, that an additional concern with the nightclubs in this district, people have really fought over, the decades to shut down these clubs because there were public safety issues. Like, I remember there was a club called The Lime, right where Midwood Flats used to be, and they got shut down because of a shooting. That was actually in the days when Eric Adams was our state senator. His office was right across from that place. And like the city planning was saying, oh, if you have issues with nightlife, you should go through a mediation. And I'm sorry, but how do you mediate public safety issues? And for those of you who have, I don't know if some of you have been on the board over the last couple of years, but we did have one establishment, a guy in Omaya on Lincoln, like kind of between Lincoln and Lefferts and Flatbush, that was basically a bar with music late at night, like what Regina is saying, and it was very loud music apparently. And their tenants started complaining. Their tenants came to the board, and it was a huge issue. And we did go through this whole mediation process. Yakov, like I have to give him credit. He really helped with that to try and connect the owner with DEP and with the tenants to sit down and mediate and have sound installation installed. And it dragged on and on for like a year, but the latest people were saying they were still dissatisfied, they were still hearing thumping and pounding. And then they came to us for a dance license and we were like, really? But actually it's not allowed in that district, and you know, kind of rightfully so, I think. But yeah, I think when I think back to the clubs that I used to go to back in the day in Manhattan, I think they are either M districts or they're like C4 and C6 districts, which tend to be all commercial. They don't have residential. So, okay, what's next? Create a pathway for corner stores.
Cheryl has her hand up.
Cheryl, I'm sorry. I have trouble seeing these.
I understand, Suki. I was gonna say something, but I didn't want to interrupt. We all need to be realistic here on this chat. We live in New York City. We are seeing our places be overpopulated. We're living in a lawless time, and we have to assume that every possible scenario can have a worst case scenario. And keep in mind, we give an inch, a yard will be taken, not might be taken, a yard will be taken. So we have to really take into serious consideration everything that we allow and agree and fight for now. And I think you all know what I'm fighting for. And this is just, you give an inch and they will take a yard. We have to be realistic with everything that's going on. History repeats itself, but these days it's only worse. So let's just be wary and alert as to what we are saying yes to.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody else raised their hand. I missed it.
I did, and then it came down, and then Nicola is after me. The only thing I'm gonna add is I think the consideration to your point of what other zones, like it needs to stay there. And I think based on even looking at our map, and you know, I would say like even the it's not R8, C8, it's like it's those, some of those corners probably could stand what happens in that. So at the end of the day, there's absolutely no need for it to be in C1 through C3 at all. There's other places that those things could go. So that's all.
Okay. Anybody else?
This is Nicola. Just to piggyback on what Cheryl was saying, the main thing we need to continue to focus on while we are talking about how this will affect CB9, these are citywide text amendments. So this goes in place, it affects every community across the city. So I'm just assuming that there are going to be unintended consequences that we can't even begin to fathom. And as Cheryl said, I'm with you. We need to know that there will be a worst case scenario that we may not even understand the ramifications are, but we have developers that are spending a lot of money and a lot of time making sure that they can maximize on these text amendments.
I completely agree. And so the next proposal that we're getting to, okay, all right. My apologies, I'm getting a little, okay. The corner stores, that is definitely something that is going to affect the entire city and is very sweeping. So the idea is that there are areas that are all residential, you know, even the avenues in these areas don't have commercial overlays. So city planning, they're saying they would like to grant exceptions in rare cases for new small stores to open in residential areas within 100 feet of an intersection and under 2,500 square feet, subject to environmental and community board review, and that this would also be available for large-scale development sites. So let's take a look at the text and see what they mean by rare. Okay, so in this case, it's a city planning authorization. They can allow use group 6 and use group 7. Use group 6 is the retail. But keep in mind that the retail category is now expanded to include automotive, repair and dealerships and auto rental places. Use group 7 is offices and laboratories. And so the commission will authorize these uses, provided that it is located on a corner lot within 100 feet of 2 intersections and does not exceed a size of 2,500 square feet, that it will generate a minimum of vehicular traffic, not produce objectionable effects, that it will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood in which the building is located, and they may prescribe additional conditions and safeguards to mitigate adverse effects on the character of the surrounding area. Does anybody have any comments? So is it going to be exceedingly rare? It seems like it could be quite general to me. When I asked the guy during the public session, he said, oh, it might be for instances where like 3 corners already have a commercial overlay and the 4th one doesn't, but that condition isn't in here. The conditions that are in here are very general. Andrew?
Yeah, I remember you asking me that question, by the way. You got him on the spot. I have 2 things that I would like to ask. The first is that the text that you've pulled to share doesn't seem to include the community board response of an application like this, whereas this slide said that it would be supplemented by community review.
Well, right? So CPC authorizations, there is typically a community board comment period, but it's not a ULURP process. This is kind of like what we went through with Fresh.
But it wouldn't be like a liquor license where it is something that is granted by the community board.
No. I mean, even liquor licenses are not really granted by the community board. They're granted by the state liquor authority.
Yeah, but SLA really,
authority, I've always been told the state liquor authority tends to defer to community board recommendations.
That's what I'm saying. That level of relationship instead of what city planning tends to do, which is say, thank you so much for your comments. We're going to do this anyway. But so I would encourage you or us as a group to make sure that like, no matter what we are, even if we're opposed to this, we're opposed to this and we want to say that there should be some stipulation for community review. That's my first thing that I wanted to ask. My second question is, I know that we have some folks from the economic subcommittee here. I'm curious if they have numbers for how many vacant storefronts there are in our district, either by a percentage that are available for rent or a number, roughly.
A lot, but no, we don't have hard numbers.
So yeah, the purpose would be like, I don't think that there is, the reason I'm asking is like, I don't think that any potential user of this would be more than 2 blocks from a vacant storefront that would be suitable to their needs.
Agreed.
Definitely. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
I think this is more like in Queens and areas where it is pure residential.
It's applicable to deep in our district, the majority of the avenues.
Yeah.
Even if like some of them don't perform as of right and have commercial uses, even though they are zoned only residential.
Yeah, Nicola and then Regina.
I go back to the vagueness of some of these stipulations. Use will not produce objectionable effects. Who's defining what are the objectionable effects citywide? And how is that going to be enforced? And with the permitted signs will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Who's going to monitor and again enforce that?
Yep. Regina.
So over here on my side of town, it could definitely end up on a block on the corner here we are absolutely a residential block now, although there's doctors' offices that popped up because they bought some of the townhomes and then did whatever they did with it. So, you know, but to your point, there's places. I think we have it to where you don't have to. And also, I guess my concern too is like, okay, I would want a corner store in general. But that other thing, the C1 through C3, like adjustments, that 5,000 square foot, I don't understand why you would give a corner store that would provide different little conveniences or whatever, 2,500 square feet, and these other things, the 5,000 square feet. But that's a bit concerning. But for sure, on our area, there's definitely lots of residential blocks, just homes, single family homes or 2-family homes, where they could easily just throw something that throws off the character. Our block is already janky now because of random things that have gone up. So I would be concerned with this. There's places.
Yeah, one thing that kind of bothered me is where they say will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. But I think many people who live in areas that are all residential consider that residential use to be part of the essential character of the neighborhood. So you're like if you're fundamentally not recognizing that, then what do you have, you know? So actually, I also wanted to show you how this would affect the city. We mapped out all of the corner lots, and it's really a lot. I think that this would require an environmental impact statement from the city, which they didn't do because they said it was going to be very rare. But based on the kind of general conditions that were put out, it's a lot. And this is how it looks in just CB9. So it's a lot in CB9 as well. And you know, if you multiply all of those lots by the 2,500 square feet, that is millions of square feet of new commercial. You know, and how does that affect what we're trying to do with filling vacancies? And if that was residential space before, it's taking away residential space. How does that affect what we're trying to do with producing more housing and more affordable housing? Because frequently ground floor space is affordable housing. You know, these could be rent stabilized buildings. They could be small homes, right? Where the landlord would rather rent it to commercial that's going to pay more than an elderly lady who's paying $800 a month, right? So to me, it seems like a really drastic proposal that is at odds with, you know, a whole bunch of other things that the city is trying to do.
Yeah, so say somebody, like I can see Sullivan, our neighborhood has a lot of these little streets with corner properties. So say one of our neighbors built this pretty big building behind the house. And so that building, that garage, which is now like I think 3 or 4 stories high, where R6 could be some kind of a commercial facility now. So we should think about that, like people, it you know, right in the middle of a residential area, it could be a nightclub, right?
It could. Yeah, it could be a 2,500 square
And
foot.
they have open roof. It could be like, you know, speakers up there. It could be very loud. I guess I'm into maintaining people's peace and quiet so they could sleep at night mostly. So that's just I'm a strong believer in that. Living in
Regina?
peace.
Sorry, now I'm gonna throw in. So, okay, one of the things that I've been seeing, and I think some of our friends, East Flatbush friends, probably have seen too, is some of these corner stores or I'll even just say stores in general that sell certain goods are hangout spots. So imagine that all of the just I'm hanging out on the corner, nothing to do or stuff. It definitely you really don't want some of that on your actual residential street. Now if you went and intentionally decided to go live on a Utica or one of those busier streets with the C8 or whatever have you, that's different. You're knowingly going in. But with some of these things come other things. So it's not even just the noise. Noise from the actual manufacturing or music or whatever. It's certain people, I don't want to name names, but there are folks who, and there are changes to the neighborhood where it is certain parts are central to hanging out. I'll leave it at that, with trying to be mindful of my words. But like, obviously, liquor stores or certain things, but corner stores too. I have seen a lot of that. So, just with your leaving your home and stuff like that, you don't necessarily want all of that. So they should be reserved to whatever is currently set up in these particular blocks that we already have set up.
Yeah. Nicola?
Yep, had a problem unmuting. The thing I keep going back to is that we know we have developers that are buying up properties in our neighborhoods. So, the way it's proposed, it's like, oh, a homeowner decides they want to build like a commercial, put a commercial space downstairs. So it's almost like, okay, I live upstairs and I have commercial downstairs. That's not what's going to happen. We're going to have more developers buying property and turning it into a mixed use property because they now can, and they'll have more money coming in from the commercial, and they don't care if it takes away from the character of the neighborhood. They don't care if it's going to be noisy because they don't live here. And we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else? All right, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which goes to home occupations. So what they're saying is zoning allows certain types of businesses like law offices or music teachers while restricting others like barber shops or advertising agencies. So they want to relax some of these limitations. What does that actually mean? So what they're saying is, okay, a home occupation is an accessory use that is clearly incidental to or secondary to the residential use of the dwelling unit. They're keeping that from the old code. Now, what they're changing is that they're saying rather than only one person practicing their profession, it can be up to 3 people who do not reside in the dwelling unit who may be employed in connection with the practice of a profession. And they're going up from 25% to 49% of the total space in your apartment can be used for this business activity. In addition, they're removing a list of occupations that are banned: the advertising and public relations agencies, the barber shops, the beauty parlors, commercial stables or kennels, dispensing pharmacy, real estate or insurance offices, veterinary medicine. The following restrictions would remain. You can't sell articles produced elsewhere than on the premises. You can't have an exterior display visible from outside. You cannot store materials or products. In an R1 or R2 district, you can't display any signs other than a nameplate. You can't make external structural alterations that wouldn't be normal for residences. And we have the as ever vague, you cannot produce offensive noise, vibrations, smoke, dust, or other particles, odorous matter, heat, humidity, glare, or other objectionable effects. Comments? Regina.
All right, so I guess it goes to the crossed out things. Okay, so I definitely have concerns in general, like if it's a residential area and you have the home-based business, but it's particular things, right? So we know office rents are high, like there's all sorts of things. So even my neighbor, he's now gone, but he had his real estate agency. Granted, it was like team of one really, but that's something that you go get your license, it's relatively simple. I think, some of it's concerning because it's like, I don't know, I don't know. There's some things that I think shouldn't be something that is crossed off the list. Public relations agencies.
Well, like the commercial stables or kennels, I think
Yeah.
should remain on the ban.
Yeah. No. But the things where you like, you could literally, if you're throwing up a website, you may have a small team, somebody who comes in and does something. I don't know. It just limits it to, what is it, the big guys that can afford these large offices to do whatever have you, and limits, small, growing businesses. No one wants to work in their home forever and ever. But due to limitations and just the cost of living here, obviously, beauty parlors, full-on beauty parlors. I think that was a call out at one of those meetings. I mean, I know people who during the pandemic had to get their hair cut. They knew their barbers personally. So I'm, neutral on that, but like advertising, real estate, those sort of things, because you can easily just do small work that's not really impacting. Granted, in this day and age too, you don't necessarily have to have someone come in your office to look at a few things or whatever have you. It's, meet me at X address and then go from there. There's all sorts of ways to not impede on other people who live in certain buildings and whatnot. But this is R1 and 2. What is this again? Sorry.
So this is in any residential district, like any home or apartment across the city.
Yeah, but it's already crossed off, so it is what it is. But my concerns would have been with the like veterinarian, like all of those other things.
Oh no, the cross off.
It's not we can comment on that. It's not a done deal.
Yeah, the cross off means that they're going to allow pretty much basically they're going to allow any type of home occupation, right? There will be no limits on what type of home occupation, plus they're expanding the number of employees that you can have, plus they're expanding the percentage of your dwelling that you can use.
Okay, I just reread the restrictions piece. But yeah, I mean, obviously dispensary, farm, the thing you called out. So yeah, the common sense ones that would impede on other people's quality of life would be a veterinarian, like medicine. Are you bringing in the dog as well? Yeah. So my only things I would give a pass really is just, the things that are quite light, that doesn't stop economic opportunity from startup businesses.
Okay, Nicola?
Agree. Even, at first I thought, oh, beauty parlor, not that big deal. But those types of businesses need to have a certain amount of ventilation. There's certain restrictions and certifications, guidelines they have to follow. If you're doing it in your apartment building now, in your apartment, that's not going to come to code.
Yeah.
Right now, I could be smelling the formaldehyde from the beauty parlor next door. I don't want those fumes coming into my apartment. So that's, even something that seemed okay. Yeah, I know people that have done hair in their apartment. When you look at it at a bigger scale, a full-blown beauty parlor, not just one person, one client coming in, it takes on a whole different meaning.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And, one thing that kind of bothered me is they're still saying that, like incidental or secondary to the residential use, But I don't think 49% of the total floor area is incidental, right? And then up to 3 people. I mean, 1, I agree with Regina, totally fine. 2, maybe you have an assistant, but 3, like, get a commercial space already. We're trying to fill commercial spaces. Yeah, and then just this whole thing of, these are, if this can go on in any type of building, these are people who are potentially going to pay more rent. So especially like that, this starts to give landlords, even in regulated buildings, an incentive to get rid of the old lady who's on the restricted income, and maybe I want the hairdresser who's going to be able to pay me double because it doubles as a workspace for them. So what impact is this going to have on our housing stock? Anybody else want to comment before I?
Well, I think, people have spaces and they want to make extra funds to support themselves. And, they've gotten rid of the Airbnb, and that's negatively impacting a lot of people, a lot of families and groups in our area. So they're going to add in these little businesses. So it could be good, but there could be some serious negative impacts. I don't know. I think it's a slippery slope here that we are on with these changes.
Yeah. Regina?
I guess, what are we like, I guess the change in that list, like what exists now? If those things, what is it? Taking out the restrictions. Oh, so I guess those previously were restricted. Yeah, to have a small little something, and even there's a differentiating, so beauty parlor, right? Like what sort of things? I know hair braiders don't need certain licenses because they can't use certain chemicals, right? But then, obviously if you're, licensed cosmetologist, there's limitations on that. And yes, the chemicals, there should be a concern with that. So, some of those restrictions actually make some sense. You don't want, certain things going on in your apartment building, especially. I know from having a house perspective, I feel like I might have a different perspective, but also I've lived in apartments. So it would be concerning having some things in and out of my building going on. And, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for a place to live, not, someone to come with their dog and the veterinarian stuff. And not everybody does what they need to do with their dogs. I mean, I like animals, but, not on me. So, that's my thing. I agree with Nicola on erring on the side of, the idea that more could come, and Cheryl as well. So, I'd rather be conservative, particularly when it comes to where people live, then, and, if there's something existing, I'm sure people are working out of their home. I do my little thing here or there as well. But, it shouldn't be impeding on other people's standard of living.
Yeah. Okay.
May I comment?
Oh yeah, sure. Who's this?
My name is Alman. I think the
Zalman.
point you mentioned were very good, and someone mentioned a point. What incentive will this create for landlords? Like you mentioned, an example of an older woman take her rent-controlled apartment and then convert it, make it available to someone who's going to pay more. But I want to add to it even further. The city just passed laws that made houses unavailable for Airbnb. And you have now a lot of houses that the landlords are going to be looking to fill them. These are apartments which could be used by people who need residential, and that's going to help with the shortage in the city. That'll be a great thing. But if we open this up now to 49% of the apartment can be used for a business, going back to what someone mentioned much earlier in the meeting, where's the enforcement on this? So someone is going to say they're renting a 2-bedroom apartment, and what they're going to do is one bedroom will be one business, the other another, and all these Airbnb houses will become commercial offices, businesses, and that takes away residents.
Yep.
And I'll add, if someone was going to rent for themselves privately just a 1-bedroom apartment, they'll say, you know what? Why rent a 1-bedroom apartment and go get myself an office somewhere? The difference of a 1-bedroom to 2-bedroom is $500. The office will cost me more. Let me just take a 2-bedroom apartment. And that made it unavailable for someone who needs a 2-bedroom.
Right, for a family. Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. What's next? Okay, so more commercial activity on upper floors. Again, you know, that this is another way that commercial uses are being introduced into residential. Currently, I think in like the C1 and C2 districts, actually in C1 districts, I think they can only be on the ground floor. In C1 and C2, in C2, they can be on the ground floor and the second floor. But this proposal wants to allow commercial even on the third floor, or on part of a floor, where there's residential on the other part. And so this gets implemented according to some special zoning restrictions, which I haven't, as you can see, I haven't gotten to yet. It's a lot, but let's just talk about like the concept. How do we feel about that?
I'm gonna say no. You know, there's all these places we continually hear about in Manhattan, office spaces where they need businesses, right? Go to Manhattan. This is residential area for the most part. Let the residential spots be residential for people to live in. Let the commercial be commercial. I don't think we need, I'm against it, like fully against.
Yeah.
Taking over people's future housing, current housing.
Nicola?
Yeah, same as what Tara said, but then it also becomes a quality of life issue because now I'm on the elevator with customers for a building or, you know, businesses next door to me in my apartment. I don't want to have the traffic. I don't know, all these random people are now in my building. I just see it becoming problematic, again, unintended consequences, because we don't really know what we're opening ourselves up for.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I agree. I just think it's like it can be a safety concern, and considering how many empty storefronts we have right now, and it seems like this is directed incorrectly. Like you're taking away more apartments to create more commercial space that's just not needed.
Yeah. Regina?
Definitely agreeing with everyone. I think the commercial traffic should be in the commercial zones that will help other businesses as well. The foot traffic, this sounds very much so for those new buildings that are coming up. I was trying to remember the name, but I know, like, I'm originally from Houston, but now the way they're structuring new residences is they're kind of having your whole living situation in one neighborhood, right? You can go to the restaurant, you can go do this, you can go do that, all of the things. But, you know, I think, you know, it belongs where it's structured now, so that traffic and just the not losing the New York character as well. You know, there's just certain places and certain ways, and there's enough empty buildings for people to rent, and you know, so we're not walking past a million empty shops. So it's just unnecessary in my view, and I think it'll hurt the surrounding areas where they may go there instead of actually come out and supporting businesses that already exist in neighborhoods.
Yeah, so actually you bring up a good point. When we were talking about the corner stores, I forgot to mention that there's a second part of the proposal that would allow for ground floor commercial in large scale developments in areas that don't have a commercial overlay. So this could apply to existing housing. Large scale developments are usually something like NYCHA or some of these large Mitchell-Lama. But I imagine it's going to apply a lot to these new buildings, like Regina said. You know, something like what comes to mind is something like the Franklin Avenue proposal, the 962, 972 Franklin, which we've heard at the ULURP committee, where it's going to be like a 500 unit building, and they want to add a commercial overlay at the bottom. You know, my thought is, yeah, for some of these new developments, it might be fine. It might make sense. I didn't hear objections to it necessarily at the ULURP committee. But I don't think that it should be as of right, which is what this zoning proposal would do. I think that it should come through our community board as a rezoning proposal, and we should be able to discuss the environmental effects, if there are any, if we want it or not. And I think that the community and the local council member should retain the power to negotiate that in exchange for giving you this commercial zoning, maybe this is the kind of store that we want, that we've always wanted and have never been able to get, or you know, something. Some benefit from the community, and you know, just making it as of right would take away that negotiating power that we have in a rezoning situation. So that's my comment on that. Does anyone else want to, Regina?
I absolutely agree with that. It should go through the community. And just to highlight my point on the no regarding to like in the buildings, it's definitely like the ground floor, I'm fine with. You know, it still is more accessible, obviously, but that, to your point, going through the process that is necessary. For sure, it shouldn't be on whatever floor in these buildings that they may have to pass through, you know, residences and all that kind of stuff.
And if I could add regarding buildings, we have in some of the buildings, we have seniors. And part of the safety is that the front door is locked and you can't just get in. But the moment we're going to start bringing a lot of commercial foot traffic in, the door is going to be open. And then you can have even just one lone wolf show up. Yep. And that can be a problem. And we've seen what can happen in an elevator, you know, to a senior citizen and things like that. So we'd rather keep the residents of a building in the building and other people out.
Yep. And I'll tell you guys a very quick story. When I lived in Manhattan, there was a sex worker who had an apartment in my building, and I could sometimes hear her with her clients through the door. You know, but there can be all kinds of, you know, home occupations and yeah. Okay, so I think we are at an end here of the proposals that we can talk about. I just like to very quickly go through them and see if we can make any preliminary recommendations on these proposals. You know, as Andrew said, it doesn't have to be yes, no. It can be yes only to certain things, or we need more information or whatever. So starting with proposal 2, removing the distinctions between C1 and C2. I'm going to say that.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you put this in the context of when we need to put forth a motion to ULURP and to Big Board, just so that we have like an end date?
Yeah, so I actually would like to put it through tonight as much as we can. So let me you know, let me make this as a motion. Like I would move that with regards to proposal 2, that we okay, I'm just like walking through this out loud so you guys can help me to, you know, change the language.
This is a lot to do at 9:30 at night now.
Okay,
I think it's a little late to start crafting this.
Review this and the zoning text That's
Well,
it.
okay, so let me just, like I can send out a document to all of the committee members, like to try to summarize what we've said. But I would say for C1 and C2, I think that we were okay with adding permitting specific uses in C1, for example, bike rental and repair, as long as it's not those e-bikes and doesn't include like e-bike batteries. I would add, I think people were fine with things like mini golf and movie theaters. I would add that there's potential noise issues, so I want to see performance standards. I would want to see things like waiting areas for things that might be very congested, like movie theaters. If there's going to be large crowds, I would want to have requirements for waiting areas. In general, like maybe instead of like eliminating all distinctions between C1 and C2, maybe we actually end up, asking for some of the C2 areas in our district to be converted to C1 because they're really more C1. Was that a fair summary of what people think? Anybody want to amend that? Yes, no?
I think that. Yeah. Let's go.
I'm trying to understand. So right now, C1 is retail and bike sales.
No. Okay. All right. Let me.
So yeah, we need to take another month or another meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is really what's right. This is really the full list of uses that are allowed in C1, in C2, but not in C1. And it's really a lot of the auto-oriented uses. And so my sense is, yes, we could allow the mini golf and the movie theaters with performance standards, with, like noise mitigation and crowd mitigation, but not the auto services. Not the hazardous chemicals, as Tara said, not things that involve carcinogens.
So I said this previously, I would restate what I said, is that we should go by use group. There are 16 commercial use groups, and say like, we think that this is appropriate for C2 and C1 or versus not. Like, for example, like use group 9 is catering, and that is allowed only in C2, but not in C1. I don't think that makes a ton of sense personally, and like maybe people can fight me on this, but that's a discussion that I'm willing to have. I would also I would like to take a little bit of time to see, as you're saying, maybe we have a lot of non-conforming commercial spaces. I don't know if they're more C1 districts that have C2 businesses or the other way around. So if we are going to ask for rezoning, we have to be extremely careful about matching the existing fabric at the character of the neighborhood that does exist, and not downzoning for the sake of downzoning.
Well, it's not, I mean, in this case, it's not downzoning, it's use,
It's 2 to 1.
Yeah, but downzoning means you're changing the FAR, and you're not in this case.
Changing the restrictive use, where it's making it more restrictive.
But I'm trying to understand, when are we doing this rezoning? We're not doing a rezoning.
No,
We're making
I guess
comments to.
Right.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is that our recommendation be that rather than eliminating the C1 category, that we might want to actually increase the amount of C1 in our district, right? Because they're kind of suggesting that we essentially take away some of the restrictions that are in C1, which I think we agree that certain things, can come into C1. But
this is citywide. This is what I'm I don't understand. Yeah, we could talk about how it affects our district, but we're making these changes citywide. It's not specific to CB9.
So yes, but every district is different. Like I can't comment on what Park Slope or Bay Ridge, what they have in their C1 and C2. They might might actually feel like it's perfectly fine to not have a C1 district. I wouldn't want to say that before hearing from them. But I do think the code has a lot of instances where there are specific conditions and specific carve-outs, not only for specific districts, but for specific zoning categories, but for specific districts. So, you know, we can definitely, like, if we don't know what other people are saying, we can just say for now in CB9, you know, we wouldn't want to eliminate the C1 district or something like that, but we would want to allow the following uses in C1 that are not currently allowed. Does that sound like what people want, or?
Just about. I think for me, it's about getting a bit more clarity on like really drilling in on the differences, because I think, you know, also understanding the makeup of the current businesses. I know we called out, so yeah, Nostrand has C2, C1s, as well as Rogers was called out and a few others, but like, you know, just understanding how the changes will impact like the existing businesses. I know a few, but I'd have to map them back out to exactly the way they're zoned. So it's nice to have this information and have gone through the maps, but taking it away and then being able to come back and really have a stronger stance. But I know the next meeting was at October 20th.
So I'm actually scheduled to speak at your committee, Regina, the Economic Development Committee, tomorrow night. And so that might be a good thing to talk about at your committee. What's on each avenue, you know, maybe even one of you can help me with that. You know, we can look at a few of the major cases.
I think that could help to really start to, because that's, I saw that as an agenda item. But yeah, I think much of this is just about getting more understanding. And I agree with you, is just making sure, like, from our community board, that we have a standpoint of concerns and how that it's going to impact our neighborhood, even though it is a citywide thing. But yeah, I think just a little bit more understanding on the C1 to C2 combination, because
Okay, so I'm going to amend that proposal to say that our recommendation is that we not eliminate the C1 district in CB9, but that we allow bike rental and repair, but not e-bikes. We allow the catering establishments, we allow the movie theaters and the mini golf with performance standards, and we would like the Economic Development Committee to further investigate the uses that are in specific districts, in specific zones in our district, in order to come up with a more comprehensive list of what things we want and don't want in the C1 district. Is that fair?
Can I ask a totally random question?
Yeah.
Something that has not come up and is, I think, really pertinent to our community district is like storefront churches and small houses of worship. And I don't think that was addressed at all in the presentation that the CDP gave.
Why is it an issue?
I mean, I live on Rogers. I see a lot of storefront churches that are shuttered and have been that way for years. And I don't know if the economic group looks at those conditions or has recommendations or talks to faith leaders about them, but like I don't think that those constraints are the same as the economic constraints that this suite is designed to bolster, the suite of proposals.
No, I don't think, I mean, you know, that is probably like allowed as a community facility if it's an underlying residential zoning district, but no, I don't think that's really addressed, but you know, it's a good point, and it's something that we might want to bring up in the Economic Development Committee, you know, like what, you know.
do zoning concerns come up in the Economic Development Committee? Like what zoning changes would they like to see specifically?
I mean, I don't really see it as a zoning issue. I think it's more of, as you say, like, are they shuttered?
No, not about the churches in general.
Oh,
Like how frequently does zoning come up in the Economic Committee meetings?
well, actually, Vanessa, this might be a good time for you to say a little bit about, what you guys talked about in terms of what the small businesses are looking for to increase economic opportunity.
I mean, we've only had one meeting and we didn't talk about any zoning stuff. What we basically talked about is how to get people financially literate so they can start to open businesses and what were the restrictions behind opening businesses, but none of them were zoning that we talked about. It was just more financial, just like people can't get loans if they don't already have an established business, and like resources that there used to be around here in the past, like don't really exist anymore, and how can people get free services to learn about writing a business plan and these sorts of things. So that's what we talked about last month a lot. And how can we beautify it so more people want to open storefronts and that sort of thing. But it was nothing was about zoning.
Nicola?
I think one of the issues that's facing a commercial, the businesses that isn't addressed, because it's not addressed through zoning, it's the rent. It's too expensive for a lot of these businesses. Several of the businesses closed on Nostrand Avenue, not because they weren't doing okay, but the rent got so high, it just didn't make economic sense for them to stay open. And we're seeing that more and more. And these zoning changes, I don't think they're addressing those issues. So we've lost a hardware store. I mean, Maxine, friend of ours, can go through the list of the various stores that have shuttered on Nostrand Avenue because of rent issues.
I think that, like, for better or for worse, the city of Yes for carbon neutrality did try to pair zoning changes to ongoing financial incentives that existed for things like solar and PV panel installation, wind, etc. So I think that is a really valid point, that they should be trying to match, or DCP should be trying to match existing and improving city supporting services that cater to small businesses with the zoning.
Yeah, good point. And in fact, I did send out to our committee members, DCP had done a commercial corridors study in 2019. They didn't look at any of ours. They looked at some other major corridors in Brooklyn, and they discussed a lot of issue, including the issue of high rents and vacancies and, but it wasn't really a zoning study at all. It was just more of like a general small business study. So that was interesting that they didn't kind of continue on in that vein. Okay, so the next proposal, okay, so reducing conflicts between order, that we kind of covered that with the previous one. Is it fair to say, like, I think it would be fair to say that we oppose allowing auto repair to locate in our C1 and C2 districts, even with the BSA special permit. It seemed like what people were saying. That we would just rather the auto businesses be in our C8 district.
Correct.
Okay. So I think we can forward that recommendation. I guess I really should be voting here, should be asking our committee members to vote, Nicola, Regina, Vanessa, and myself. So I would vote yes on that. Nicholas, sounds like you would vote yes on that. And
Well, who's on the committee? Because I thought it was John.
John is not here tonight.
Okay, and who else?
Those are the people. It's me, you, John, Regina, and Vanessa.
Okay.
So you vote yes?
I just think that this is a lot to go through at this hour. It's a lot of new information, especially for our friends that are joining us from economic development. I know we're trying to push through, but I think we have to give people time to digest some of this information.
Okay, how about this? Can we vote that, I'll summarize, I'll do the minutes for the committee, and I'll summarize some of what we're saying, and we'll take that to the Economic Development Committee tonight. And then subsequently, after they've had their, say, then we will take recommendations to the ULURP committee. And it does mean we're going to have to work offline. So I would like to get a vote that people are okay with working by email.
Does that comply with open meetings?
I think as long as we're just kind of like summarizing what we've said, but that's kind of why I want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of our recommendations. Celia?
Hi, I'm sorry. I was just going to make a comment on open meetings from being on bodies that were open or public bodies for at least 10 years. When we did committees, the public was allowed to both comment, send in recommendations, and so on. It didn't necessarily mean we took everything, just means that they're allowed to give input. So if you were going to do something in email, everybody, not just the members of the committee, but not just the community board members of the committee, but everyone who came to the committee, and the public in general should be able to comment. So in other words, if you worked out whatever and put it online or put it on a website or something, and the public can see it, so the public can comment on it, it's covered under open meetings in that way.
So I can accommodate that if you all give your email addresses to Mia. If you email bk09@cb9.nyc.gov, and I will ask her to distribute whatever I send out to everyone who is here tonight.
Thank you. That would be greatly appreciated.
Did everybody get that? That if you want to be CC'd on this email, send your email address to Mia.
Yes, please, Mia. Thank you. This is Teresa.
Then are we sending it directly to the BK9 address, or does Mia have a separate address other than BK9, or?
All correspondence should go directly to the district office to the bk09-1@cb.nyc.gov.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, if people are okay with that, I think we can adjourn, and I will attempt to summarize what I think people are saying, which I think we're not against everything, but we have a lot of reservations.
Do you have a timing on when anyone who wants to comment, when they should try to have it by?
Before our next ULURP meeting, because we would like, which is the second Tuesday of November, because we would like to be able to forward some recommendations to them. Celia?
No, I didn't have another comment. It was just that one.
Anybody else? And just for anyone who's wondering, also, there are manufacturing and life sciences proposals in this, which I didn't address today, but I'm going to try to address them at economic development, because I think that's probably the right place to talk about them, because they're very supposedly very oriented towards like job growth and economic development. Does anybody else have any comments? I'm really impressed with the turnout. If there's any other members of the public who have questions, comments, happy to hear them before I close out so that we can incorporate them. Zalman?
Yes, hi, thanks. I would like, if possible, to be included in the email. I just didn't get exactly how I can get myself included on that.
Email the board office. Mia, can you read that email address out again?
Sure thing. For anyone who is interested, the email address for the district office is bk09-1@cb.nyc.gov.
And
Okay, let me try that. BK09-1 at
cb, as in community board, .nyc.gov.
And Mia, I'm also going to send you a copy of the presentation,
Sure
and
thing.
Anybody who wants can get a copy of that as well.
Definitely, sure.
I'm sorry, what do I write in the email?
Oh, that you would just like to be included in the City of Yes correspondence.
I'm sorry, in which
The
correspondence?
City of Yes correspondence.
I'm not hearing you clearly, I'm sorry.
City of Yes.
City of Yes, got it, thank you.
You're most welcome.
I guess I can't make a motion to adjourn because I'm not part of the committee.
Can I ask one more question before you adjourn or make a suggestion before we adjourn?
Wait a minute, I just noticed Suki is not on here.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe Suki may have had a
I know it went
technical
quiet.
issue.
Mhm.
Yeah, we just need to give her a moment to get back in. She may be having some tech issues really quickly. So just give us one moment. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Her laptop died.
Oh, of course it did. We've been on here for a minute.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. Suki should be in momentarily.
Okay, Celia, you had a question? I see Suki's on now.
Thank you. There's, I guess it's a question, comment. Is it possible that the chat, I realize that these meetings don't seem to, meaning this particular community board's meetings don't seem to have chats, but is it possible, because I know it is possible, to have the chats maybe set to host only? This way, if there is something that the host can drop in the chat, such as the email address or something for everyone to see, it's not a matter of trying to hear what the person is reading off, because everybody learns differently. There are many different types of learners. There are kinesthetic learners, there are audio learners, there are visual learners. We're all different people. So it would be nice if, I know chats sometimes can be contentious, but again, opens meetings law, public body. So if the chat can be set to host only, where the host can actually drop stuff in the chat if we need, like contact information if we need it or something like that, it would be greatly appreciated. This way, apart from someone else reading it off, if someone is more of a visual person or a visual learner, they can write it down for themselves.
I'm not opposed at all. In general, this is just in general. I'm not opposed in general. I only ask that people follow the same rules of courtesy and conduct that you would if you were speaking, meaning like don't chat back and forth with each other when somebody else is speaking. The other thing I would say is
they wouldn't be able to speak back and forth with each other, because if it's set to host only, they can only contact the host. So if the host is the
we can
They
try that.
can only contact the district manager.
Yeah.
If the host is the person that's the chair in the meeting, then they can only contact that person. That's why I said it can be set to host only.
Yeah,
if something's important, you can drop it in the chat.
I think that's a good idea, and I'll ask if we can do that in future meetings. I will say that now, as a chair, I do understand, what our chair and our executive members have said before, that it's actually quite difficult to monitor the chat and, monitor the meeting at the same time. So I find that, like, there was one meeting where the chat accidentally went on and I wasn't able to look at it whatsoever. But that being said, I'm okay with it. I think, and I just wanted to quickly, before we adjourn, give you all my email address in case you do, have further questions or things you want to contact me about. It's SUKICHEON as in Nancy, G as in gold, @gmail.com. Yeah. If there's anything, feel free.
Just repeat, please.
S as in Sam, UKICHEO as in Oscar, N as in Nancy, G as in gold, @gmail.com. And I'll discuss with the board office what the chat options are for future.
Thank you. Greatly appreciated.
Okay. Is there something else?
I think Zalman had his hand up.
Yep, Zalman. Zalman, you can speak.
Sorry, I guess I raised it before. Thank you. I just asked the email address earlier. I appreciate it.
Okay. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn. And anyone want to second that?
I second, Nicola.
Nicola. Okay. So thank you all for staying so late. Thank you to Mia for staying so late. And, I hope we can come up with some useful recommendations for city planning.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
you for putting that presentation together.
Thank you for coming out, everyone. It's appreciated.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you to Suki.
Good
And
night,
Mia,
everyone.
you're awesome.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
guys. Take care. Be safe out there.
Take care. Have a good
you.
night.
Bye.